beneath the blazing heat of the Sahara Desert, communities are quietly carving thousands upon thousands of half-moon shapes into the earth. At first glance, they seem simple, almost insignificant. But these curved trenches are sparking an extraordinary comeback, helping millions of acres of dry, lifeless ground slowly return to green, productive land. This is the story of the Great Green Wall, one of the most ambitious land restoration efforts ever attempted. Could this massive project actually slow, or even stop, desertification across Africa? And what exactly are they doing with billions of dollars in funding? Let's break it down. The Sahara spans roughly 9.2 million square kilometers, almost the same size as the United States, and covers close to 1/3 of the African continent. Even more concerning, it's still expanding. Since the early 1900s, the desert has grown by an estimated 10 to 20%, pushing farther south year after year. Just below the Sahara lies the Sahel, a semi-arid stretch that crosses more than 20 countries and supports hundreds of millions of people who rely directly on the land to survive. What makes this situation surprising is that the Sahel isn't completely dry. It still receives seasonal rains, short, powerful downpours each year. The real issue isn't the lack of rain. It's the condition of the soil. Years of degradation have left the ground hardened and crusted over, almost like concrete. When rain finally falls, it can't soak in. Instead, water rushes across the surface, triggering sudden floods and then vanishing just as quickly. This creates a destructive cycle. Long droughts weaken and damage the soil. Heavy storms wash away what little fertility remains. Gradually, the land loses its ability to hold moisture at all. And when that happens, desertification isn't just about climate, it becomes the collapse of an entire water and soil system. Desertification isn't just about rising temperatures or shifting weather patterns. It's the breakdown of an entire water-soil relationship. When the ground can't absorb or hold moisture anymore, the whole ecosystem begins to collapse. Recognizing this crisis, the African Union launched a bold initiative in 2007 called the Great Green Wall. The vision was massive, an 8,000-kilometer restoration effort stretching across the Sahel, from the Atlantic Ocean in the west all the way to the Red Sea in the east, connecting more than 20 countries in a shared mission. But despite its name, this isn't a literal wall of trees running across the continent. Instead, the Great Green Wall is more like a patchwork quilt of restoration projects. Each region applies its own strategies depending on local soil conditions, rainfall patterns, and the needs of the communities who live there. Rather than trying to force the desert to suddenly turn green, the project focuses on something deeper, rebuilding the natural relationship between land, water, and people, so the environment can heal itself over time. For years, large-scale tree planting was seen as the obvious fix for desertification in the Sahel. International campaigns poured billions of dollars into planting billions of seedlings. On paper, it looked promising. In reality, most of those efforts failed. The issue wasn't commitment or funding, it was timing and foundation. Young trees were planted into soil that had already lost its structure. The ground couldn't hold water. It lacked organic matter and living microorganisms. When heavy rains came, the water rushed away before it could soak in. When the dry season returned, intense heat quickly evaporated any remaining moisture. The result? Between 80 and 90% of those saplings died within 1 or 2 rainy seasons. Planting trees in lifeless soil is like installing high-tech equipment on a crumbling foundation. The real challenge in the Sahel isn't simply a shortage of trees, it's the land's lost ability to support life. That's why the Great Green Wall shifted its strategy. Instead of focusing only on planting, it prioritizes restoring soil health and water retention first. The project uses practical, locally adapted techniques to slow down runoff, prevent erosion, and rebuild fertile ground across degraded farmland and ecosystems. And at the heart of this approach is one surprisingly simple method: digging half-moon-shaped pits designed to capture rainwater and gradually bring exhausted soil back to life. The half-moon design wasn't chosen by accident. In the Sahel, rain doesn't fall softly over hours. It hits hard and fast, short, intense storms that send water racing downhill in powerful waves. If you dig a straight trench in those conditions, it simply becomes a channel, guiding the water away even faster. But a curved, open crescent works differently. It intercepts runoff from multiple directions, slowing it down and spreading it out. Instead of letting water escape, the shape forces it to pause. That curved form reduces the speed of the flow without completely blocking it. Water isn't trapped like it would be in a pond. Instead, it gradually sinks into the ground. The system works with gravity and the natural slope of the land, not against them. That's exactly why half-moon pits succeed where many other designs fail. And these pits aren't dug randomly. There's a precise method behind every one. Farmers first identify the natural contour lines along a slope using ropes, wooden stakes, and basic hand tools. This ensures each pit is positioned perpendicular to the direction water will rush during heavy rainfall. Every pit is shaped like a crescent, with the open side facing uphill to catch incoming runoff. The curved back edge sits on the downhill side, forming a small earthen barrier that holds the water in place long enough for it to soak in. Typically, each pit measures about 4 to 6 meters across and only 20 to 40 centimeters deep. Around the outer edge, builders pile up a small ridge of soil, about 25 to 50 centimeters high, to help contain the captured runoff. They're intentionally shallow. The goal isn't to create a water reservoir. It's to slow the surge just enough for the moisture to infiltrate the soil. And in a region where every drop counts, that brief pause makes all the difference. Laid out about 8 to 15 meters apart and arranged in parallel lines along the land's natural contours, these pits function like a step-by-step water management system. Each row slows the runoff a little more, creating a cascading hydraulic effect across the slope. What makes this approach even more powerful is its simplicity. No heavy machinery. No expensive equipment. Just ropes for measuring, basic shovels, and human effort. On average, one person can dig a single pit in about an hour. That makes the technique affordable, easy to replicate, and scalable across vast areas. Once the pits are finished, farmers plant native grass species inside them, varieties like Andropogon and Centrus that are naturally adapted to harsh, dry climates. These grasses are extremely drought-resistant and develop deep, fibrous root systems. Those roots anchor the soil, break up hardened layers, and help rainwater seep deeper underground. As the grasses take hold, they begin trapping organic matter and holding onto moisture. This creates the first thin layer of living soil, a foundation that allows the land to slowly rebuild itself. The transformation doesn't happen overnight. But within 2 to 5 years, the change becomes visible. What starts as scattered clumps of grass gradually spreads into thicker, more continuous ground cover. With each rainy season, vegetation becomes denser and more stable. Field research in Niger, Burkina Faso, and Senegal shows that restored land can reach 40 to 60% vegetation cover, compared to nearly zero before the intervention. And it's not just grass making a comeback. As soil structure improves and moisture levels stabilize, shrubs and native trees begin to regenerate naturally. Fragmented habitats reconnect. Insects return. Small animals reappear. Grazing systems stabilize. Over time, what were once isolated green patches evolve into functioning ecosystems, not temporary islands of vegetation. Beyond environmental recovery, the half-moon method also strengthens local economies. As soil fertility improves, farmers are able to grow staple crops like millet and maize again. That means food security, household income, and seasonal jobs tied to digging, maintaining, and harvesting. What's remarkable is how much impact comes from such a low-cost solution. Communities can build and maintain the system themselves, expanding it year after year without relying heavily on outside resources. Planting trees is a direct action. But half-moon pits act as a trigger for an entire system to reboot. And in the tough climate of the Sahel, it's this systems-based strategy that delivers results that are practical, long-lasting, and scalable across millions of acres. Beyond restoring the environment, half-moon pits are also transforming local economies. Field programs in Niger and Burkina Faso show that once degraded land is revived, millet and maize harvests can jump by 50 to even 100%. Thousands of hectares that were once considered unproductive are now back in use. For families across the region, that means more food on the table, higher household income, and steady seasonal work tied to digging, maintaining, and farming the restored land. But half-moon pits aren't the only solution being used. Another powerful technique spreading across Africa is the sand dam. The concept is simple but highly effective. Builders construct a low wall made of concrete or stone across a seasonal riverbed. When flash floods rush through during the rainy season, the barrier traps sand carried by the current. Over time, that trapped sand builds up behind the wall, forming a hidden underground reservoir. Millions of liters of water are stored within the sand itself, safely protected from the intense heat. Unlike open reservoirs, where as much as 90% of water can evaporate, sand dams keep moisture underground, dramatically reducing loss. Communities can access this stored water year-round through shallow wells. It supports drinking supplies, small-scale irrigation, and livestock during long dry seasons when surface water disappears. Sand dams are especially common in East Africa, particularly in Kenya, where more than 1,000 have already been built. Similar projects are active in Ethiopia, Tanzania, and Zimbabwe. Research shows that villages using sand dams can triple their available water supply, cut erosion, and significantly boost farm productivity. Today, they're considered one of the most dependable and scalable water harvesting strategies for dry regions with seasonal rivers. Another key restoration method within the Great Green Wall is the use of stone lines, sometimes called contour stone bunds. This approach involves laying rows of loose stones along the natural contour of gently sloped farmland. When heavy rains hit, these stone barriers slow the runoff instead of letting it sweep soil away. Water spreads out and seeps downward, while sediment and organic matter settle behind the stones instead of being carried off. Over time, fertile topsoil gradually rebuilds, creating better conditions for crops and grasses to grow once again. As seasons pass, fine sediment builds up behind the stone rows, slowly restoring a layer of fertile topsoil where crops and grasses can take root again. These stone barriers don't completely block the water. Instead, they slow it down just enough to allow more infiltration, recharge soil moisture, and dramatically reduce erosion. This method has been widely used in Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Ethiopia, especially in agricultural zones where the soil had been heavily degraded. Field data shows that stone lines can boost crop production by 30 to 80%, particularly for staples like millet and sorghum. And because they rely only on locally gathered stones and manual labor, they're affordable, long-lasting, and easy to maintain. In many areas, these simple structures remain effective for decades, forming the foundation of long-term dry land restoration. So now you've seen how parts of Africa are bringing desertified land back to life. But the story doesn't stop there. Let's shift continents and head to China, where the battle against desert expansion has taken a very different form. For generations, northern China has faced an invisible but relentless threat: sand. When powerful winds sweep down from the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan Desert, massive dust storms can engulf entire cities. Skies over Beijing have turned dark in the middle of the day, as clouds of fine dust rolled in from the north and west. By the 1990s, there were years when people in the capital wore protective masks for more than 80 days just to avoid breathing in airborne sand. The Taklamakan itself formed millions of years ago. Surrounded by the Qian Mountains to the north and the Kunlun Mountains to the south, the basin between them is effectively cut off from major moisture sources. These mountain ranges block humid air from reaching the region, transforming it into one of the driest places on Earth. Annual rainfall here averages less than 100 millimeters, nearly 10 times lower than parts of California, which Americans already recognize as dry. To put that into perspective, each square meter of land in the Taklamakan receives roughly the equivalent of a single 16-ounce bottle of water per week. That's nowhere near enough to naturally sustain plant life. As desertification intensified, China decided to confront the problem head-on. In 1978, the government launched what would become one of the most ambitious environmental projects in human history, the 3 North Shelter Belt Program, often called the Green Great Wall. Despite the nickname, this isn't a single continuous wall of trees. It's an enormous network of forests, windbreak corridors, and ecological restoration zones stretching more than 4,500 kilometers, from the Xinjiang-Uyghur Autonomous Region in the west to Heilongjiang Province in the northeast, covering much of northern China. The long-term goal is staggering: plant 35 million hectares of new forest by 2050. To put that in perspective, China's forest coverage has grown from about 10% in 1949 to more than 25% today. This effort is widely considered the largest land-based human project ever attempted, not built with steel or concrete, but with trees and long-term commitment. This marked a turning point, a bold attempt to bring life back to some of the planet's most hostile landscapes. So how did they approach it? Instead of rushing in with bulldozers, planners began with careful analysis. In the Taklamakan Desert, engineers mapped the terrain using satellite imagery and drone surveys to track dune movement and prevailing wind patterns. With that data, they designed a large-scale stabilization system. The solution was surprisingly simple: straw. Workers laid straw in diagonal grid patterns across the shifting sand, forming checkerboards roughly 20 by 20 feet each. Across the blazing dunes of western China, these straw barriers create orderly geometric patterns that stretch for miles. From the air, the desert looks like an endless golden chessboard, each square acting as a small but critical defense against the moving sand. But that clean, geometric pattern hides an enormous logistical challenge. What looks simple from the sky is actually a large-scale engineering effort, costly, labor-intensive, and carried out in some of the harshest conditions on Earth. Millions of pounds of straw have to be hauled deep into the desert, often traveling hundreds of miles. There are no highways cutting through these dunes. Trucks frequently get stuck in loose sand, and crews must navigate terrain where infrastructure barely exists. Once on site, workers dig shallow trenches by hand and carefully press bundles of straw into the sand, forming precise grid lines. Under a punishing sun, where temperatures can soar past 120 degrees Fahrenheit (49 degrees Celsius), with no shade for relief, every task becomes physically draining. Yet thousands of workers continue the effort year after year. Because each straw square isn't just a sand barrier, it's the starting point for ecological recovery. The checkerboard pattern stabilizes shifting dunes, reduces wind speed at ground level, and creates small protected pockets where humidity can linger. These microenvironments make it possible for planting to begin. After the grid is secured, machinery moves in. Mechanical augers drill holes at the center of each square, preparing the sand for carefully selected, drought-tolerant species such as saxaul, desert poplar, and red willow. The seedlings aren't random. They're grown in nurseries and transported to the desert only when strong enough to survive. Each one is planted precisely in the middle of a straw square, where its young roots can settle just beneath the surface, shielded from extreme heat and blowing sand. Workers add controlled amounts of water and firmly pack the soil around the base to ensure solid root contact with the moist layer below. As the weeks pass, the straw continues doing its job. It lowers surface temperatures, reduces evaporation, and prevents fine sand from burying the seedlings. Gradually, wind, dew, and microorganisms break the straw down into organic matter, forming a nutrient-rich layer that feeds the growing roots. Over time, what started as a fragile plant surrounded by straw transforms into part of a living network. Roots anchor the dunes. Vegetation spreads. The once mobile sand begins to stabilize. Slowly but steadily, the desert starts to change. You've now seen how communities across Africa and China are tackling desertification in very different, but equally strategic, ways. Are there other innovative methods happening around the world? Let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you in the next video.